The rotoscoping animation technique was created by a man named Max Fleischer in 1915. Max Fleischer was an animator, director and producer from America, and he tried to find an improvement for animation. He did this through a combination of a projector and an easel used for tracing. This allowed Fleischer to create realistic animations and called this device the rotoscope. The rotoscope was first used in his animated show called Out of the Inkwell. At the time, rotoscoping was simply known as the Fleischer technique, and it was only used by him as he patented it in 1917. However, that patent expired in 1934, allowing other people and companies to use this technique, which led to the creation of Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This movie was a big step in animation history, as not only was it the first fully animated movie to use rotoscoping, but it was also the first fully animated feature-length film ever. The film was a huge success, resulting in it winning Best Musical Score at the 1938 Academy Awards, as well as an honorary Oscar being awarded to Walt Disney himself the following year. The fact that the patent expired also allowed animator Ralph Bakshi to use it, resulting in most of his animated movies being fully rotoscoped, such as Wizards and Lord of the Rings, the latter being known as one of the worst examples of rotoscoping ever due to the simple fact that it was used just for the sake of it, which is frowned upon by most animators. Movies like these all helped rotoscoping become a well-known and successful animation technique that became commonplace for most animated works. As the years moved on, however, so did the technology, and people were trying to come up with new ways of improving well-known techniques in various areas of media, with rotoscoping being one of them. It started with simple things like more powerful zooming for more accuracy when rotoscoping. However, it then moved on to more scientific things as we learnt more about ourselves and the way the human body moves with the various tendons and muscles. This allowed animators to take this new knowledge on board when rotoscoping for future projects. However, it eventually evolved even further, and this led to possibly one of rotoscoping's greatest and most common uses, which is motion capture. Motion capture is the process of recording the movements of objects and people so that they can be replaced with something later on. However, unlike rotoscoping, motion capture is done in real time. It came about in the late 1960s because of a man named Lee Harrison III. Lee Harrison was a pioneer in analog electronic animation, and he used a series of analog circuits, cathode ray tubes and adjustable resistors in order to make a system that could record a person's movements in real time. The actors who were being recorded would wear something known as a data suit that was wired up to a computer. With time, the technology was improved, with better bodysuits that were more accurate at recording body movement. At first, it was sparsely used, with the movie Sinbad, Beyond the Veil of Mists, being the first film to use motion capture for the entirety of it. The film was a flop, however, motion capture would find popularity sooner rather than later with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. It is now commonplace in some of the biggest movies of all time, such as Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. In addition to this, it is also primarily used in the video game industry in order to capture characters' animations, such as Johnny Silverhand as played by Keanu Reeves in Cyberpunk 2077. Moreover, in the world of video games, a video game called LA Noire was released in 2011, which used proprietary motion capture technology known as motion scan, which captured actors' facial expressions from every single angle in order to get realistic facial animations for the characters in the game. As a big feature in this game was interrogating people and picking up on things via their facial expressions. The most well-known person to do motion capture is actor Andy Serkis. Andy Serkis is an actor, director and producer who has been doing motion capture for the past 20 years. He has provided the motion capture for many famous pop culture characters such as Gollum from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, King Kong in Peter Jackson's King Kong, and Snoke in Star Wars The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, to name a few. I have sent some questions over to my animation lecturer, Trevor McCready, regarding rotoscoping, and he will now be answering them.
What do you like about rotoscoping, and is there anything you don't like about it? Yeah, quite a few things. Rotoscoping is great for getting accuracy of movement, accuracy of anatomy, basically accuracy full stop. It is a fantastic tool for that. And I mean, that if you look back to like the early invention of it, I think it was around 1917, something like that. It's credited to Max Fleischer. If you look at where rotoscoping came from, it came from a position of animators wanting more accuracy. That was the thing that they were really pursuing at that point to see where they could take the discipline. And to this day, it's still a great thing for accuracy. The thing that I don't like about it is when it's used incorrectly. When rotoscoping is used purely for accuracy and nothing else, it kind of becomes pointless. As I said, it's great for anatomy and character and movement, and even backgrounds, like camera tracking within a room. All that stuff is fantastic for, but if you just rotoscope it, you don't really add anything to it, there's kind of not a lot of point to it. You may as well just film it. So rotoscoping is a fantastic tool, even today, lovely organic way of doing things. But if you're just going to rotoscope it, don't bother, just film it. How often do you find yourself rotoscoping something? Personally, for animation, not as often as I'd like to. I do enjoy it. It's quite time consuming to get a good result. You end up having to shoot down to very, very low frames. So if you're in 25 frames a second, anything above sort of every 3 frames, it starts to look a little bit jarring, which if that's what you're going for is fine, but shooting ones gets a really fluid motion. Funnily enough, I've got a project coming up in about 4 weeks' time that I'm going to be doing rotoscoping work for, and that's some titles for a short film. One of the things I like the most is seeing students use it for the first time. Every time students discover rotoscoping, they start working with it, it becomes apparent that they can make something that looks quite cool and moves fairly well. So it's a really good confidence builder, and I work with that all the time. Where do you think rotoscoping will go in the future, seeing as it has evolved into things like motion capture? That's a good shout. Motion capture and obviously performance capture. It would be remiss of me not to mention pioneering forces in that, such as Andy Serkis. If you look at his work on the original Lord of the Rings films and pretty much everything he's made since, the guy was drafted in to do some basic motion capture, so body work, and before you know it, he was doing performance capture for some close-up stuff, really revolutionary sort of edge-pushing work on things like the character of Gollum, which still holds up great even now. I was watching it yesterday, ironically, it still looks good on film. It carries on with that theme of we want accuracy of movement and of anatomy so that we can make fantastic creatures that look like they're believable. So that's how we got to motion capture from rotoscoping. Where do I think it's going to go in the future? I think rotoscoping can still do some stuff that motion and performance capture might not be quite so good at. Rotoscoping allows us to make something a little bit more organically. It's a little bit lower tech, so it's more accessible to everybody, and ultimately it's hand-drawn by a human being with all the beautiful imperfections that carries. So if you want something that looks really kind of organic and homegrown, rotoscoping I think still got the edge over things like motion and performance capture. How influential do you think rotoscoping has been on the animation industry? Okay, so if we go back and look at it from its kind of inception, when it first started getting used, I mentioned Fleischer and that kind of era. It's been picked up and it's been used by most major animation houses at some point, and it's even used in kind of motion graphics and compositing and that kind of stuff now. Rotoscoping was a double-edged sword. It allowed us to do two things. It allowed us to make stuff more creatively, but unfortunately it was also exploited. A lot of rotoscoping was recycled through films. There's a great example of this on Disney. If you go on YouTube and look for this, there are examples where Disney started using rotoscoping in really creative, fantastic ways. If you look at stuff like Snow White, that's a seminal piece of work. Some beautiful movement there. Snow White kind of dancing and like cleaning up and stuff like that, and characters dancing around in the background. If we fast forward a little bit, a couple of decades in Disney, you can start looking at things like the Aristocats and Jungle Book and that kind of stuff, and you can see, again, these are on YouTube, you can see cuts together of where rotoscoping's been recycled and reused in films. And if you look at a timeline of the history of Disney around those decades, you'll notice that the amount of time between films being released got closer and closer together. Cynically, you could infer from that rotoscoping stopped being used to be creative and it started being used to make things happen more quickly and therefore more cost effectively. And I think it shows up in the declining quality of those films. Is there anything you think could be improved about rotoscoping? I guess the best way to answer that is it would be a bit like saying, is there anything to be improved about a hammer? They're both just tools. A hammer can be used to build things, it can be used to break things. And it's the same with rotoscoping. The tool on its own is benign. It doesn't really need improvement. I think it works absolutely fine. It's the intent and the application of the person using it. I say this over and over again, but if you're just going to rotoscope something, just film it. There's no point. The real beauty of rotoscoping is it allows us to borrow a bit of reality so that when we sell unbelievable characters to the audience, they come along for the ride with us.
I'm now going to have a go at rotoscoping something myself, and for this demonstration I will be using the end scene from Spider-Man 2 where Spider-Man is swinging through New York City. Whilst my rotoscoping attempt may not be the best looking and also very time consuming, as this took several weeks to make, during the making of this documentary, even though I was familiar with the process of rotoscoping, I have learnt a lot more than I originally thought I would have. With its incredibly interesting origins leading to its immediate success once the patent had ended, rotoscoping is an incredibly useful animation tool that is always evolving, and I look forward to see what it becomes next.